Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Resistance Recovery Podcast. I'm really excited to have my friend, Brian Francis Culkin, who is also an author and a filmmaker and an astrologer and a few other things. And really excited to talk about his newest book, which is on somebody that we're both very interested in, somebody who probably doesn't get as much play as he should, and that is the late French thinker Rene Girard. So, Brian, what's the name of this book?
The one that I just wrote?
Yeah.
It's called Rene Girard and COVID-19.
Yeah. So, folks, this is a remarkable book where Brian uses Girard's theory of mimetic desire to explore really global capitalism in the age of COVID. So maybe we should just start just by talking a little bit about who Rene Girard was and why we find him so compelling. You want to start? Or?
Sure. So Girard was a French intellectual. He identified as an anthropologist. Like, things today are so fluid and open that it's tough to stick to one discipline. So it's just as easy to call Girard maybe a theologian or a philosopher or some kind of critical thinker. But he taught at Stanford for a long time in the anthropology department. But he began his career as a literary critic. And that drew him paradoxically to these fundamental anthropological questions of, what is a human being type of thing. And Girard, and that eventually led him into which he is probably most famous for, his very provocative and innovative and really radical reading of the New Testament. So that's like, when you think of Girard, you think of him in three different facets, I think. The first is in his younger career as a literary critic, and then moving into his, with his famous book, Violence and the Sacred, which is like kind of a classic anthropological text. And then going into his later stuff where he's kind of linking all this stuff together in his work on Christianity and the New Testament and this kind of new interpretation, this kind of anthropological interpretation of the New Testament. So his work focuses on the fundamental question of desire. And when we say, like, it's funny, if maybe 10 years ago, if somebody said desire to me, I would be like, oh yeah, it's things you want. And you don't. And even maybe people listening right now might think, desire, yeah, no big deal. We all desire things. But I think that when you, at least for me, and not just Girard, but, reading people like Zizek and other people, and then certainly having my own new encounter with the Gospels as well, you kind of realize that desire isn't just, I want things. It's literally the fundamental question of what constructs a human being. And Girard's, one of his central ideas is that desire is not, first of all, he distinguishes desire, as do most people, from like basic biological needs, like, food, water, stuff like that. Like, wanting to eat, to live is not desire in the way that Girard uses the term. But what Girard says is that desire is not a psychological product. It's not something that, like, we don't have desires. They are entirely and completely social, in the sense that we only desire something because we see somebody else desiring it, right? Like we don't have desires of our own, which is interesting because when you think of, let's say, someone like Tony Robbins and like the whole network of personal development and the kind of new age, I guess, pseudo spirituality that now permeates 21st century America, you always get this thing like, discover your purpose, discover your desire, find out what you really want. And Girard would say, like, that's impossible. That's a ridiculous idea to tell people, because you're going to lead them on like the ultimate wild goose chase. And so what we have to start with, if we read Girard and we apply Girard, is that desire is a social phenomenon. We desire only what we see others desiring. And that's sounds so simple, right? But the consequences of that are like immense, like unbelievably, because when you realize that, you can all of a sudden escape from so many things that may have been bothering you, right? I mean, so many of the pathologies that are present in a culture like America in the 21st century is precisely because this desire has become, for lack of a better term, radicalized, in the sense that it's just like everywhere. Like, we want followers, we want money, we want crypto, even to a point, like, we want to be enlightened, right? It's like everything is this matter of wanting what the other wants, right? So when we can become conscious of that, we have the capacity to leave the game, and really, like, we win the game by losing it, right? By saying, like, kind of throwing up the white flag, say, wait a second, I don't want to play in this game anymore, because no one really wins this game. This is like a circular game that no one wins. So I guess that's there's a lot we could say about Rene Girard, but that's like that's a fundamental cornerstone, is that desire is not something that you have. It's something that you get when you're, like, out with your friend, like, in a technical sense, it's like through the process of socialization, but it's just like, you're on Facebook, you're hanging out with your friends. Like, this is where you pick up what you want. You don't pick it up from your psychic architecture.
Right. Yeah. To give a shout out to my teacher, who I interviewed earlier on here, Eugene Webb. He was one of the guys who popularized Girard in America. And he taught the theory like this. He said two parts. And the first part was, because desire is the only psychological motion, it gives rise to and animates the self. And that's, that's pretty easy enough to understand. But the second premise was the radical one. Furthermore, your desires are not your own.
Indeed.
And he really would speak, Girard did too, but what Webb emphasized was that this is a metaphysical desire, meaning it's a desire for a plenitude of being. It's born of a sense of lack.
Indeed.
Yeah.
It absolutely. It's desire is the way. Well, I think we should even move further back. It's like, why do we have desire, right? Like, we have desire because no human being is coincident with themselves. And what I mean by that is, like, no one equals themselves. There's always a piece missing. And what we try to do in our life is to become whole, right? And this is a big thing in contemporary New Age discourse. Like, you want to become whole. Well, why aren't we whole to begin with? What's the problem? Like, we're in a body, we have brains, we have a biological organism. And so desire is the process, or I like that what Eugene uses, the motion that we use to complete ourselves. And, this is where we can tie it back. You might have some people on your listening right now who aren't religiously minded. But when you think of a concept like original sin, people have a very kind of a deformed idea of what sin means. Sin does not mean like you're a bad boy or, a bad girl, or you did something bad. Sin is like this basic idea that a human being doesn't equal himself. There's a piece missing, like there's something off. And we try to fill that gap with desire. And a lot of times we end up doing bad things when we try to make ourselves whole, right? Drugs, we go out and, whatever, we break the 10 commandments, so to speak. We do things that maybe we shouldn't be doing in a strategy to become whole. But so it's just this idea that human beings are not whole de facto. It's not like we're traumatized and all of a sudden we're not whole, or it's not like we have these like terrible experiences and all of a sudden we lose our balance and we have to find ourselves again. No. We're born not whole like that. Like, we come into the world missing a piece, and desire is that motion or that energy or that metaphysical power in which we try to become whole, in which we try to fill that piece that's missing. But the problem is that desire is a reflexive phenomenon. It's like, we don't know how to fill it. We don't know what to do. So we learn how to fill it by watching what other people are doing. So it's just like, this architect, this like global architecture of desire that we're all living in, and we don't know it. And I think what Girard, I mean, to me, Girard is the key thinker to move forward in the 20th century, like more so than, just list all the great philosophers of the past. I mean, Girard to me is like the guy, because his work on this, even more so than someone like Lacan, like nails it. And also too, it's not nearly as cryptic and confusing as someone like Lacan. I think Girard is ultimately a yeah, of course he's difficult. Definitely. He's a difficult thinker, but he's also a simple thinker, and he's a straightforward thinker. And he's not, disclosing all these ridiculous concepts that you need to read a paragraph 30 times to understand.
Right.
He's giving it to us in a relatively straightforward way.
He's very loose
in a way that we can understand and apply in our lives too,
So let's keep unpacking this. So we have
Hello?
this. Hello, are you there?
Yeah.
So we have this.
Yeah, I'm listening. Yes.
We have this sense of lack, and we look toward others who appear to have found that thing that we're looking for. And so Girard says,
not necessarily, yeah, go ahead.
Well, Girard calls these people our models.
Yes.
So somebody may seem to have plenitude because they have a certain woman or a certain job or a certain amount of money or occupy a certain status. And we say,
or a certain pair of jeans, or a certain pair of sneakers.
That's right.
Or whatever.
And we think,
the list of things that can turn on desire are infinite. It's different for everybody. I mean, you can have, and you see some kid across the street wearing these really clean, whereas for other people, they might be on Twitter and say, if only I had 100,000 followers, then everything would be great. And they look at this person that has 100,000 followers, and they look at them and say, that person has it all together. This is how I want to fill my own gap. So the ways and the strategies by which human beings try to fill themselves or complete themselves are infinite. I mean, they're very interesting too. And of course you have destructive ones like, I'm going to do heroin, right? I mean, that's a classic way to become whole, like drugs is of course, very destructive way, but ultimately drugs are very, very linked to desire. And that in a way, almost then with something like drugs, you get into like biological issues too, where the body's desiring things too, versus simply a psychic or spiritual process,
And so we start imitating these beings around us who seem to have it. And he calls this mimetic desire. So we imitate the desires of others because we misapprehend them. We think they have the thing when in actuality, they don't have the thing any more than anyone else. Yes. And Girard is very interesting when he talks about we have external mediators and internal mediators. So if my father appears to have more being than I do, it's natural for a little boy to imitate his father. And that's actually healthy. But when the desire becomes, and that's an internal mediation, or is that external?
That's it. When it's a healthy, it's external.
Yeah, that's right. And
yeah.
But then internal means that there's nothing to stop us from converging on the same object.
There's nothing to stop us from rivaling each other or competing with one another. Yes.
So I mean, like, job or a woman or prestige or.
Indeed, the list goes on. Pair of sneakers, the list goes on.